When I was given the Star Trek pilot, when we finished it, I stepped right into the Mission Impossible pilot. And right after that was a very fascinating idea for a Western called The Long Hunt of April Savage. I did that pilot. They told me here, said, whichever one sells, you will become the art director on. Well, 2 of the 3 sold. And the man, Robert Sterling, who wrote the Western, and it was cast with Robert Lansing. And he said that the part was too old, so he saw to it that the thing did not go to series. I had reason to want to do both shows, and also reason not to get one caught dead on either one. It wasn't my choice. So that's where I wound up in Star Trek.
Logical. Flawlessly logical.
The first script that would come in, we'd usually have to come up with some kind of a memo if we felt that it was indicating something, now that not just my bailiwick, that was going to be beyond our reach, especially in time or money. Then we would get together with Bobby Justman. And Bobby would absolutely refuse to hear that something would not work unless we could tell him how to make it work. You had to come up with another idea if you wanted to kick one out.
Matt was totally optimistic, and when I used to tell him, Matt, I'm sorry, I've got to take money from your construction account again because we're over budget, his eyes would just get a little watery, his blue eyes get a little watery, and said, whatever you say, Skipper. And he somehow scraped along on practically no money for set construction.
By the time it got to a reasonable finished script, Gene would have a meeting with all of the department people. Anyone could get into anyone else's bailiwick, but everything was thrashed out then. So when you left, each one of us knew exactly what we were going to do. By the time a director would come in, which might still be 2 weeks down the line, with a week to prepare, this stuff was cut and dried. We never made any changes for a director.
What is this place?
It is not used.
It's very old. Does it have a name?
I would say, as a rule, being responsible for the one being shot, you'd be working on as many as 5 that were still to come, each in a different level of developing, and as much up to maybe 3 that had been shot. There were certain optical effects that we had to prepare for, different things that I worked with Howard Anderson on. So altogether, the average day you could be faced with stuff from maybe 7 different shows.
Your people are most efficient, Captain.
I did come in many a Saturday, and when I was trying to find a shape or an answer or something different, because there was just too much going on the other 5 days of the week. And later, when Al Francis took over, he found out of it, and he would frequently come in on Saturday with me. And when you get together with somebody like Al, who loved white, he loved glass, he loved reflections, and I would start something I was trying to do, and Al would get an idea to put in it, and first thing you know, you've boiled up a hell of a good salad. So Al was a dream in that respect. But a lot of the new things that or something that had to be different, they were generally worked out on Saturday, just because weekdays are too busy.
Matt would come up with wonderful, wonderful drawings and renderings for the sets, and then Gene would decide, yeah, I like this part, I don't like that part, so then Matt would go back to the drawing board. He had great slides of his renderings and of the sets themselves, and I believe those were donated to a museum or a university, I'm not sure which now. What he would do, and this is kind of interesting, as for Christmas presents, he would buy jigsaw puzzles and gesso them over so they were blank, and then he'd put them together and gesso them, and then he would paint scenes of his own devising on them. For fellow flyers, he would put planes, various kinds, sometimes their own planes. For people like me, and I have one, he would do sets from Star Trek. But then he would, after he'd finished painting them and they were dry, he'd break up the puzzles into their component parts, put them in an unmarked box and give it to you. So you had to figure out what it was, putting the the puzzle together. And I happen to have the front gate of the Squire of Gothos.
I mean, Squire, it goes back somehow or other to the old country and spells castles. And I had already seen that big carved door that we used. But it gave me an opportunity to have a exterior that was different, away from the usual space sort of thing. And it was very easy to tie the interior into it on the same set. And of course, the saving grace was, of course, Bill Campbell that played the Squire. I think the way he took that part on it, he probably wouldn't have missed it if the set had disappeared.
You must excuse my whimsical way of fetching you here. But when I saw you passing by, I simply could not resist.
That was one of the fun sets that came in. It was different. Our temple for Apollo was another one that was very enjoyable. It had its problems because it was a big and fairly heavy set piece. But we had to tie the camera down and move the greenery enough to move that set piece out and then put everything else back so that when they put that film together, that temple was there 1 second and not there the next. So that had a few problems in it, but they were cope-withable.
Mr. Scott?
6. Fire now, Mr. Kyle.
Rumors have it that the Jeffries tube was actually named by the crew, and I've heard that time after time that the phrase was just coined. We have to call it something. So somebody came up with the idea, why don't we just call it the Jeffries tube? Since Matt, of course, was the designer.
It was the only part of that set that that was on an incline, and it was made out of a sonotube that we cut and expanded a little bit. Sonotube were large cardboard tubes that could be purchased. They were used for forming concrete, and we would buy these in either 8 or 10 foot lengths, and they came in many various diameters. They ran about a ½ inch thick, and they were wrapped cardboard. Well, we found these marvelous for pieces of set and curve walls because they were quick.
No, the Jeffries tube is used even today.
We will get to deck 13 by using the Jeffries tubes.
The last feature, as an example, we actually took the Jeffries tube and made it really big. That's where you see the Viceroy and you see Commander Riker fighting together is inside a larger version of the Jeffries tube. So Herman Zimmerman has made sure that the name sticks, and he has always idolized Matt and his work, and he's always tried to reincorporate Matt's work and designs and to make sure that the theme is carried on into the new TV series and all of the features. And almost all the time, not in every episode of course, but when we need a crawl space, that's exactly what we use, is always called the Jeffries tube.
Matt did a lot of things that were interesting, and as far as creating backgrounds for the various sets. And we had to have an alien set usually once a week or once every 10 days on our adjoining set. That was the Planetscape, or where we built an alternate vessel.
We were confined, for the most part, to 2 sound stages, one of which was what we call the Planet set, which had what supposedly were supposed to look like distant mountains, and had a sky cyc that went around 3 sides of that stage. That cyc was lit with colored filters, so that when we started a new show on a new planet, the routine was that the gaffer, the lighting superintendent, and the grips would come to my office and say, "Come on down, we're ready to get the color now." And I would go on down there and I'd say, "This show should be red," if it was like a muck time. And we would pick out the colors of sky.
The Planet set usually would keep you busy because we kept 20 feet on one side and one end of the stage clear so that rolled equipment could be moved on it, which meant that, and you always had to shoot into the far corner to get any depth of feeling, and our actors would have to move back and forth across it. So usually we would set up with foreground pieces. We could come up with 4 basic setups, and they would shoot one and move to the next one, and by the time they went to the third one, we had converted the first 2, so that every setup on the stage could come up with a different foreground piece and a bit of a different look, but still gunning into the far end. So days working on the Planet, usually I rarely ever got by the office, because you were just shifting according to eyeball, or designed with the toe of your shoe, I guess you could call it. There were a number of odd ones like that I got a kick out of.
This is the future, and nobody's been there yet, so they can't say you can't do that. And so if you're shooting a shot where you have a set over in this direction, and then I'm looking at you, and I want to get a shot from an angle over here, behind that new angle, I'd put a red wall or a chartreuse lighting effect, and it was accepted by people because it was science fiction and it was the future. Those masses of color did a lot to make the show believable.
The stuff on the ship itself is just a case really of rearranging some of our stock wall pieces and kicking in some kind of influential color from offstage somewhere to help sell a different environment or a different situation. And of course, blessed with not only John Dwyer, who was a very talented workaholic, and Jim Rugg on special effects. And what went on upstairs in the art department, I could depend on Brother John or whoever else was up there, that if any questions came up out of the mill about how something was working, they could solve it. And with that kind of help, hell, you can't lose. I was in great shape.
The art director is like the architect in your home or office or anything else. He supplies all of the hard things that you see. Then I would come in and do carpeting, drapery treatments, all the furniture, all the wall designs, decorations, and pretty much put the thing together. And you try and stay a little bit on the cutting edge. I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I keep in touch with materials, that are going around. For example, on the original series, we were the first ones to use refractive mylar because it had just come out, and metallic mylars because they had just come out. And I went crazy with this stuff. In those days, nobody cared about what you put on the set as long as there was something that looked right. I just take a piece of masonite and cover it with some of this adhesive mylar, put a 2x4 in the back side of it, and hang it on a wall.
Spock, you're in a black box tied in with light rays into a complex control panel.
Fascinating.
It was late in the morning. It was probably about 11:30, and Matt Jeffries, the production designer on the original series, came up and said, John, we need an extra 8-foot wall in there. Well, you don't have extra stuff because we had no budget at all. So we had to dream up an extra space wall. And it wouldn't have been so bad if it had been a living quarters, but it was really a lab. So it had to be technical looking. And so I said, well, at the time I got to after lunch. So it's not a lot of time. So I said, good. When you're building the wall, cut me 4 4x4 pieces of 1/4-inch masonite and paint them black. I'll take care of the rest. So I went over and got my little stash of styrofoam products and had them sprayed while I was going down. I gave my lead man a couple of bucks, and I told him, go down to the commissary and get 2 sleeves, different sizes, of takeout cup lids. Which the plastic lid that fits on a takeout cup when you go with your coffee. So he came back, we flipped them all over, we painted 3 different colors, a bunch of them 3 different colors, then glued them onto these black panels that I had made up along with a couple of shapes. That was it, the wall was done. And when they panned past it, because there were, nobody's gonna hang on it, but if you're panned by it, they're colored, they're up there in the wall, and they're shining because they're plastic. In the original series, we had to be really inventive because we were dealing with stuff that nobody knew anything about. There was no space shows. And we didn't have any money, so you had to scrounge. In effect, scrounge everything that you got.
subconsciously you were always on the search for something that you could use. And the trash bin was a gold mine on many occasions.
We stole moldings from the casting shop and put them in the engine room. And we painted soccer balls and used them at 3 different points on the engine room, sitting there, little domes that they were painted gold, boom, boom, boom. And the big problem there was keeping the actors from playing with them. Scotty used to come in and start throwing the thing around. He's a pretty good soccer player, and that I'm sitting there looking at him and Shatner booting the ball around, guys, take it easy here. I got 2 more of them, but I don't want to waste them. You're breaking the paint.
The jewel lights on the consoles in the bridge, and anywhere where we needed a panel that had lights behind it. Ice trays were used that were tipped on the edge to pour resin in, put some color in them.
That was buttons and lights. If we wanted them to light up, we drill a hole, put a piece of plastic on top of it, put a light in back of it.
Well, one of my favorites has always been the IBM Selectric typewriter. That was a new machine, and Paramount had just bought a truckload of these things. And office services was busy installing them in all the offices. And their packing was foam shapes that were new. This was a new type of shipping material. And these they were throwing away. And we were on down the street one day, and we saw this bin full of these styrofoam shapes and grabbed them and said, hey, we can make these work, They're good shapes, they're light. We can cut them, change their shape, put holes in them, put lights behind them, paint them, run pipes into them. You might see them in the hallway, you might see them in a room that was not established as a regular part of either the ship or a planet surface set.
The Enterprise, the elevator, the turbo lift, or it was now the turbo lift, we used to call it the elevator, but it had to go up and sideways. And the way that worked is Jimmy Rugg, the effects guy, got in back of the thing. We had a panel in there with smoke-colored plexi in it, and he had a tin can mounted on a motor with slots in it and a light inside. So when they wanted to go up and down, he'd hit the button and hold it like that, and you'd see the floors go by on the light. And then when he wanted to turn to go horizontally, he went like this and did it. It was pretty basic.
The plumbing and pipes in the Enterprise all had color codes and some form of nomenclature on them. That would be a series of letters and numbers and something to look like you could tell what this pipe was on this side of the wall, because it came out of the wall. And GNDN with a number behind it and then a color code became very common throughout the Enterprise. GNDN means goes nowhere, does nothing.
The Tribbles, we got some mechanical toys and covered them with fur. That's how they walked along the floor. Most of the Tribbles and Trouble with Tribbles were stuffed with cotton. Some of them were hollow, were just sleeves, and we put a balloon in them on a cord, and that's how they breathe. You put a little air in it, and you push down, and they go, you let out, go, and that's your breathing Tribble. And then the other one, what we only have very few of those. We had beanbag Tribbles. They're covered with beans, so you could put them on top of a corner, and right on a corner, and they just kind of form to it rather than if you did it with a cotton, they just fall off.
Stratos, Captain. City actually floating in the sky.
I think one of my most favorite designs of Matt's was Stratos, City in the Clouds. To me, just the idea of designing a city that floats on a cloud, I could never even conceive of that idea. But it was still so simple in its design, but looked so plausible.
The city was roughed out. Matt did a rough drawing on it. There was never a final drawing that was done on the city. We worked from the rough. It was green foam, white glue, hacksaw blades, and X-Acto knives. And we chopped up the foam and glued it together and put the shapes on it, and wrapped the bottom with cotton and hung it from the ceiling.
Looks as tranquil as its reputation, doesn't it?
It is one of the most interesting metropolises in the galaxy. Have you ever visited here, Captain?
Once, I didn't have time to look around.
I've never had the opportunity. However, I hear its art forms are incomparable.
Yes, art is the population's chief occupation.
One of my pet shows is a thing called the Cloud Minders. I found a guy up in Topanga Canyon in his old barn welding stuff up for coffee tables, free-form metal coffee tables, put a piece of glass on top of them. And I went up and I said, I'm going to rent 3 of those from you. And because I couldn't afford to buy them, I didn't have the kind of money. And so I made a deal to rent them. He says, well, I haven't got glass for all of them. I said, I don't want glass at all. Just keep the glass. He says, okay. He just kind of looked at me strange. I took them down, turned them up, hung them up on the wall. And that was some of the metal artifacts that were hanging on the wall in Cloud Minders' museum-like corridors. Yeah, and that's what you had to do in those days, and carrying over. You know, the theory hasn't changed. It's just the stuff that you're working with has changed.
I think really the high point of that whole thing, and there were many high points really, were the people I worked with. John Dwyer, he was a marvel. Al Francis was as a cameraman. And like my brother or Joe Jennings and some of the others that would occasionally work. Normally we had a very small art department with Star Trek. Sometimes there were only 2. But I think all of them enjoyed what they were doing. And Lord knows it did for me. And with the load that they picked up, it made my end possible. But the people have always been a big part of any of the shows that I've worked on.